going to do is we're going to talk about how to use the pen tool. And so to do this, the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go into Illustrator and we're going to create a new file. So in Illustrator, once this dialog box pops up, we're going to give it a name. We'll call it pen tool exercise and your last name. And then in terms of dimensions, we can just do 8.5 by 11, and we're going to do a vertical orientation. I'm going to keep it to one artboard, but if you would like to have additional artboards to have more room to work, that is fine. We don't have to worry about printing these or anything like that, so we're not going to really worry about what color mode we pick. And now that we have this, we're going to hit create. And the next thing that we have to do is we're going to have to bring those silhouette images into Illustrator. And so if you open your Finder window, you should have already downloaded your pen tool demo file from Blackboard. And when you open it, in order to bring all of these over into that Illustrator file, what you're going to do is you're going to click on that top image. And then if you push down on the Shift key, you can then click on the bottom image, which will select all of the images in between. And you can then click, drag, and bring them over to Illustrator. And you should see something like this. The next thing that you're going to have to do is just scale them down because obviously this is a little bit crazy. So to do that, we're going to hold down that Shift key, and that's going to keep everything at the same aspect ratio. You don't have to worry about anything stretching or warping. And we're going to put these in order, generally speaking, from easier to harder. There we go. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to want to trace over these, but because they're black, that could be a little bit challenging. So we're going to drop the opacity. And so if you click Command A on your keyboard, that will select all of the images on this page, at which point we can now head over to our Properties panel. And about halfway down, we'll see this opacity option, and we're just going to click that. And I'm going to bring it down to maybe about 30-ish%, just enough so that way I can see my tracings as I go, and it's not going to have to fight with a black background. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to layers, which is going to be up at the top. And we want to really prioritize using layers effectively because this is going to be our system of organization. So what we're going to do is we're going to lock this layer by clicking this little square next to that eyeball. And now we're going to go to the bottom, click that plus symbol, which is going to create a new layer. And you'll know that you're in a new layer as you work because instead of having a blue outline on everything, we will have a red outline. And we are going to rename this. So I'm going to double click trace layer or whatever you feel is helpful and going to keep you organized. Now that we have this new layer created, we're going to start using the pen tool. And the way that the pen tool works is it's going to drop a series of anchor points. And as we need to change the direction of a path or a curve, we will place an anchor point where that transition needs to take place. So we're going to go to our tool panel and click on our pen tool. Be advised that there's another icon right below it that's deceptively similar called the curvature tool. We don't want to use that one yet. We're going to use that pen tool, the keyboard shortcuts, the letter P. And we're going to start by working on this circle. Now, if I want to do straight lines, all I have to do is click and drag, click, and it'll create straight lines. You'll also notice that it's starting to automatically fill in my shape, which can be a little bit distracting, especially if we're trying to kind of map what we're trying to do. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go over to this toolbar. I'm going to make sure the fill is in front, and I'm just going to hit this little red dash to turn off the fill. The next thing that we're going to do is focus on creating curves. So if I go to the top of this circle and I click at that top midpoint, I'm going to click and I'm going to keep my mouse pressed down and I'm going to drag. You don't need to pull these too far, maybe about to there. And that's going to start to create a curve. And the way this is working is every time I click and drag, it's going to give me something called a handle. And these handles, wherever I move these handles, are going to pull my path or my curve in that direction. So you can see as I bring my cursor down, wherever I place it, that curve is being pulled slightly to the right before it can come down to my pen tool. So I'm going to come down to about the next halfway point, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click down on my cursor and I'm going to pull downwards. And I'm going to keep pulling until I can get this line as close as I can to match the contour of this circle. We're going to do the same at about 6 o'clock. And then we're going to come up about halfway to 9 o'clock. Line it up. And then in order to close this path, I'm going to click and drag on that initial anchor point that I dropped down. And I'm going to pull until I get my curves to line up right where I need them. Now, as you're working on these, you might have areas where those curves do not align. So let's say that you're working on this and your curve is doing something like that and you can't get it to line up. That's okay. The expectation isn't that you get these correct on the first try. That's going to take a lot of practice. But what you can do is once you've got your form as close as you can, we're going to go back and edit these. And so to do that, if you go over to your toolbar, we're actually going to use what's called the direct selection tool. The keyboard shortcut is going to be the letter A. So if I click the letter A on my keyboard, now I'm going to have this white cursor. And that's telling me I can pinpoint and control each of these curves on their own. So if I click on this anchor point, I've activated these handles. And what I can now do is I can click on this handlebar and just start to shorten it until it gets closer to where I need it to be. And so you can go back at any point and edit any of these to adjust them and get them to where you need them to be. You can also use them to adjust the anchor points. If I need my anchor point to move, I can click on that anchor point and move it anywhere I would like. The other thing I can do is I can control one half or the other of my shape. And so if I want to only move one half of a handlebar, if I push down on the Option key, that's going to allow me to just control one half of those handles, giving me a nice little corner or vertices in the path that I'm trying to make. Now that's not going to be necessary on this circle, but when we go over to the next shape, we are going to need to use that Option key to give us a little bit more control. So if we scroll over to this heart, we now have a slightly more complex form, and we're going to have to use some of those tools that we just talked about to give us a little bit more direction to deal with these angles. So we're going to go back to our pen tool. The letter is going to be key on your keyboard, and I'm going to go right to that center right here. And what I want to do is I want to click and I'm going to drag so that I have a line that looks like this. And before I release my mouse, I am going to then press down on that Option key, and I'm going to swing my other handlebar up so that my heart has a nice little set of antennae. And you'll notice now that I have this handlebar right here, when I go to bring my pen tool over here, that handlebar is pulling that curve up into the upper right before that curve can come back down. So I'm going to come down probably about here, because this is really where that path starts to change direction and move away from me. You could also potentially come all the way down here. That's going to take some practice. So we're going to start small and work our way up and get more confidence. So I'm going to bring my cursor to about here, and I'm going to click and drag and keep dragging until I have something that matches the contour of that heart. Again, if you need to make adjustments, you can hold that Option key down, and I can use that to go back and adjust these handlebars at any point in time. And that's going to be necessary because I need to make sure that I can get my anchor point down here. Now, if my handlebar is too long, I can't get that curve to lie flush. So that's telling me I need to push down on that Option key. And if I start to shorten this curve or shorten this handlebar and bring it in, the shorter the handlebar means the shorter the curve is going to be, the less it's going to try and pull away. And that's looking a little bit more user-friendly. So now I can click on this corner and I'm going to drag, and I'm going to get this line as close as I can to match the contour of the heart. And then I'm going to push down on that Option key again. So that way I can swing this handlebar up so that it mirrors the other side. And we're going to do the same thing working our way up. Find where that curve starts to transition away from us. I'm going to click and I'm going to drag. And then I'm going to come all the way back down. And once I click on this, I'm going to then push on my Option key because again, we don't want that other handlebar to move. And I'm going to drag this until I can get my curve as close as I need it to be. And then I can push on that Option key to also go back and adjust this other half of the heart. And that, in a nutshell, is how you kind of use the pen tool on a fairly basic level. As you progress and you move on to some of these more complex forms, you'll end up needing to put more anchor points down. Now, what I don't want to see is a series of tiny, tiny straight lines. Keep in mind, every anchor point is going to result in a larger and larger file size. It's also going to make it much easier to accidentally grab an anchor point and change a shape, whereas if you have cleaner, longer paths, you're less likely to interfere with the contour of a form. So what we're going to do with the cupcake, you can start wherever you would like. I'm going to start right here. And if I toggle over, if I start right on this corner, I'm going to click and I'm not going to drag because I only want to make a straight line. So if I click, drag, or excuse me, just click, I don't need to drag. I'm going to click and then I'm going to click. But here, I know that I'm going to need to make a curve happen. But the problem is, as soon as I start to drag, it's impacting that straight line. So what you're going to do is you're going to click and then push on that Option key, because again, we only want to manipulate that second half of the curve, the new path that we're making. And I'm going to pull this line over and to the left because I want my curve to come over and to the left before it comes down to the other side. And I should be able to get this to be pretty close to lining up with that cupcake without having to do an additional anchor point in the middle. You could have one, it's not crucial. You could come to that midpoint, pull it, and then bring it down here. That's absolutely fine too. And now what we're going to need to do is we're going to have to change the angle of the path. Again, this little handle right here is going to pull my curve down, right? And we can see that as I try to bring my cursor over here, that curve is being pulled downwards before I can get it to this path. So we're going to switch that by pushing on Option, swing this up so it pulls the curve upward. And then I should be able to click and drag and get this to be much closer. At which point you're going to continue working on this form, sort of mirroring what we did on the other side. And then bring it back, close off that form, and make any little adjustments that you need, right? If there are little gaps, you can always click on that direct selection tool and reposition these anchor points as needed. And once you've spent some time with these, you'll move on to working on these more complex objects.